Kevin Smith thought he had left the woman he loved behind, until a single phone call froze his world. 8 months apart, a mysterious collapse, and a secret he never expected. Will he arrive in time to save her and the child he didn't even know existed? One wrong second, and everything is lost. Welcome back to Heartwoven Tales. I'm your storyteller, Selena, and I hope you're doing well. I'd love to know, where are you listening to me from today? Make sure you stay with me till the very end of this story, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more amazing tales. Now, let's dive in. Kevin Smith stepped out of the abandoned warehouse with a storm raging inside him. The fury etched across his face so sharply that even the shadows seemed to shrink away from him. The negotiation, if it could even be called that, had ended in disaster. $1 million deal shattered, his reputation challenged, and every man inside scrambling to read his volatile silence. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the metal roof, echoing like tiny drumbeats against the ground, but nothing softened the explosive tension in his body. His jaw ticked hard enough to ache, and the muscles in his forearms tightened as he pushed open the heavy steel door with enough force that it slammed into the wall behind him. The cool night air hit his burning skin, but it did nothing to calm the inferno inside him. He inhaled sharply, trying to force oxygen into lungs that refused to cooperate. The world around him felt too loud, too bright, too suffocating, until everything came to a brutal halt with the buzzing of his phone. He answered with the same rage boiling inside him, expecting one of his men, expecting excuses, or worse, more bad news. But the trembling voice on the other end didn't match anyone he knew. "Sir, is this Kevin Smith?" The moment he heard the uncertainty, the flicker of fear beneath the words, his anger wavered, only for his entire world to collapse at the next sentence. "This is St. Helena Medical Center. You're listed as the only emergency contact for Aleena Harris." It felt like someone punched the breath out of him. His hand froze around the phone, knuckles whitening as the name reverberated inside his skull. Aleena. The one name he hadn't allowed himself to speak for 8 long months, the name he had buried under work, gunfire, and ruthlessly controlled silence. His heartbeat stuttered violently, his spine locking in place, the fury inside evaporating and leaving only a chilling emptiness. The night around him blurred as memories flashed. Aleena's laughter echoing in his kitchen, her sleepy voice whispering his name against his chest, the way her fingers curled around his when she was scared. And then the last night, the night he walked away from her while she begged him to stay. A tremor broke through his usually steady hands as he gripped the phone tighter. "Aleena?" He barely recognized his own voice. It wasn't the voice of Kevin the Mafia boss, cold, feared, unbreakable. This was Kevin, the man who had once held a woman like she was the most precious thing he'd ever touched. The man who still woke up at nights reaching for someone who wasn't there anymore. The nurse's voice softened, but the fear behind it was unmistakable. "Sir, she's critical. She collapsed earlier today and kept whispering your name before losing consciousness." The words tore through him, sharper than any bullet he'd ever taken. His chest constricted, breath breaking in uneven shards. For months he had convinced himself she was safer without him. Now she was fighting for her life and calling for him. Guilt slammed into him like a tidal wave, so powerful it made his vision spin. He turned sharply toward his black SUV, ignoring the startled looks from his men. One called out, "Boss, where are you?" But Kevin didn't hear anything anymore. His feet pounded against the wet gravel, each step fueled by fear so raw it threatened to swallow him whole. He shoved the car door open, breathless, hands shaking so violently he could barely slot the key in. The moment the engine roared to life, he pressed his forehead against the steering wheel for a fraction of a second, long enough for the weight of the moment to crush him. She needed him. The woman he had abandoned to protect was lying in a hospital bed, whispering his name with her last strength. He hated himself for ever leaving her. He hated himself for not knowing she was hurting. And most of all, he hated that he could lose her forever before he even got the chance to fix anything. He pulled out of the parking lot with a screech so loud his men jumped back, shouting after him, but Kevin didn't look back. Rain pounded against the windshield, streetlights streaking across the glass like broken rays of gold. His chest burned with every breath, panic crawling beneath his skin. The mafia boss who never feared bullets, betrayal, or death itself was terrified of losing the only woman who ever saw him as a man worth loving, not a monster built from violence and secrets. His thoughts spiraled as he sped down the dark highway. He remembered Aleena's soft smile the last morning he held her, the way she cupped his jaw and whispered, "Kevin, I'm scared of losing you." At the time, he thought leaving her would keep her safe from his enemies. Now that same decision felt like a knife carving through his ribs. His breath came in sharp, uncontrollable bursts. His grip on the steering wheel tightened until his knuckles burned white. Every mile between him and St. Helena felt like a personal punishment. The phone vibrated again on the passenger seat, jolting his already frantic heart. He grabbed it instantly, half praying, half dreading what he'd hear next. "This is Nurse Emily again," the voice said, shakier this time. A thick pause followed, too long, too heavy. "Sir, there's something else you need to know." Kevin's pulse hammered in his throat. The air inside the car thinned, his ears ringing from the weight of the suspense. The nurse hesitated like she was bracing herself. He clenched the phone so hard it creaked. "Tell me," he demanded, voice barely controlled. She inhaled shakily. "Sir, Aleena is pregnant." The world slammed to a stop. His foot slipped off the accelerator. His breath vanished. His heart felt like it cracked open in one violent strike. Pregnant. Aleena. The words collided inside him with the force of an earthquake. He stared ahead at the blurred road, his vision fracturing as shock ripped through him. Pregnant. The syllables rang in his ears again and again, each time sharper, deeper, more devastating. His hand trembled around the phone, his throat tightening with a pain he could not swallow anymore. He hadn't seen her in 8 months. 8 months since their last night together, where she cried into his chest, begging him not to leave, and he kissed her like a final prayer. Now she was fighting for her life, and carrying his child. A sound escaped him. Half gasp, half broken whisper. The rain outside intensified as if the sky itself knew what he had just learned. His chest crushed inward, breath shaking, mind spiraling through disbelief, fear, guilt, and a love so powerful it nearly blinded him. He blinked rapidly, but the blur wouldn't clear. The road, the lights, the world, all vanished beneath the weight of that truth. His fingers tightened around the steering wheel, voice cracking into a whisper meant for no one but the empty car. "My God. Aleena, what did I do to you?" The engine roared beneath him as he sped faster, but no speed was fast enough, no distance short enough. For the first time in his life, Kevin Smith, feared mafia boss, ruthless leader, untouchable king of the underworld, felt completely, utterly powerless. And as the storm raged outside, a darker storm brewed inside him, one built from terror, regret, and a love he could no longer run from. Kevin pressed harder on the accelerator, heart collapsing beneath the weight of everything he had just learned, just as his phone buzzed again with the hospital's name flashing across the screen. The black SUV skidded into the hospital parking lot, tires screeching against wet asphalt as Kevin Smith slammed the door open without a thought. Rain still plastered his dark hair to his forehead, droplets running down his sculpted cheeks, but nothing mattered except the fragile figure lying inside those walls. His heart hammered violently, each beat echoing in his ears like a gunshot. He ran through the automatic doors, ignoring the startled shouts from the reception staff. The bright, sterile lights of St. Helena Medical Center hit him like a blow to the chest, cold and unforgiving, reflecting the fear and guilt he felt like acid in his veins. His eyes locked immediately on the ICU glass windows. There she was, Aleena, pale, trembling, barely recognizable. The woman who had once been the sun to his darkened world now seemed like a ghost, delicate and fragile, clinging to life as if each breath were a struggle she shouldn't have had to fight alone. Kevin's hand pressed against the cold glass, fingertips sliding against the condensation as if he could physically bridge the 8 months of absence between them. Aleena. His voice broke, cracking under the weight of emotion he had suppressed for far too long. Her eyes flickered toward him, confusion and pain mingling in their depths, and the sight stabbed him mercilessly. He remembered that last night, the night he had walked away to protect her from the dangers he couldn't shield her from. She had begged him, tears soaking her pillow, begging him to stay, to fight, to love her like he always did. And he had turned his back, believing distance could somehow protect her better than his presence ever could. But now, looking at her struggling, he realized the cruel truth. Absence had only amplified her suffering. The doctor appeared at the door, a hesitant figure framed against the bright hallway lights. "Mr. Smith?" His voice was cautious, almost afraid of Kevin's notorious temper, but Kevin barely heard him. He was rooted to the spot by guilt and terror, unable to comprehend the intensity of what he was witnessing. "Her vitals are unstable. Extreme stress and emotional trauma triggered her collapse," the doctor explained, his words cutting deeper than any knife. Kevin's jaw tightened violently, his knuckles cracking as he pressed harder against the glass. He could feel the weight of every decision he had ever made pressing down on him, threatening to crush him. He had left her, abandoned the woman he loved, and now fate was punishing him in the cruelest, most merciless way. His breaths came in short, shallow gasps as he finally stepped into the room, the sterile smell of disinfectant and antiseptic assaulting his senses. Aleena's chest rose unevenly beneath the thin hospital gown, her skin clammy with sweat, and her fragile hands clutched the thin sheets like they were lifelines. Kevin's eyes scanned every detail, every labored breath, every flicker of her eyelids, every subtle twitch of pain, and his chest tightened with a mixture of fear and unrelenting guilt. The baby, he realized, was his. The memory of that night came flooding back, the way her hair had fallen across her shoulders, the way she had clung to him as though letting go could destroy them both. And now she was carrying his child alone, suffering in ways he could never forgive himself for. He moved closer, careful not to startle her, but unable to resist the magnetic pull of concern. His hand hovered above hers, trembling as he finally dared to brush his fingers over her clammy skin. "I'm here," he whispered, voice hoarse. "I'll never leave you again." Her eyes flickered open just long enough to meet his, a glimmer of recognition flashing through the haze of pain. Her lips trembled as she attempted a weak smile, and Kevin's chest felt like it had been ripped open. How had she endured so much without him? How many nights had she cried herself to sleep, hoping he would come back? The answer burned in his mind with every beat of his broken heart. The doctor cleared his throat, stepping forward cautiously. "Mr. Smith, she's extremely unstable. The stress has triggered a critical response, and we need to act quickly." Kevin barely registered the words, every fiber of his being focused on Aleena. He could feel the pulse of life beneath his fingertips, the fragile rhythm of a woman and child he had almost lost forever. Panic clawed at his chest as he realized just how close they had been to slipping away. His mind raced, thoughts colliding in a storm of fear, guilt, and raw, unfiltered love. I'm here," he said again, more to himself than anyone else. "I'll protect you. I'll fix this. I promise." As he reached to adjust the blanket over her trembling form, Aleena's lips parted weakly. "Kevin, you're here?" Her voice barely rose above a whisper, broken and fragile, but it hit him like a thunderclap. "I should have been here," he murmured, pressing his forehead to hers in a desperate, silent apology. The nurse stepped closer, her voice calm but urgent. "Sir, we're struggling to stabilize the baby. Prepare yourself for the worst." Kevin froze, a cold, icy grip wrapping around his chest. Every instinct in him screamed to fight, to rip the world apart, to save them both. But he realized the cruel truth. He had never felt so powerless in his entire life. Time became meaningless as Kevin held Aleena's hand, feeling the trembling beneath his fingers, hearing the faint, labored breaths, watching the monitors flicker with dangerous irregularity. Every second stretched into eternity. Every beep, every alarm, every whispered word from the nurses was a reminder that life was hanging by a thread. He leaned closer, whispering apologies, confessions, promises, words that had accumulated for 8 months, now spilling out in torrents of grief. "I left you. I thought I was protecting you. I was wrong," he murmured, tears blurring the edges of his vision. "I'll never leave again. I swear it." The monitors began to beep more rapidly and Kevin's entire body went rigid. Nurses and doctors moved with precise, frantic urgency, but he could barely breathe, barely focus, barely think beyond the fragile figure before him. Every memory of their love, every argument, every smile, every heartbreak, everything they had shared flashed before his eyes. And beneath it all was the relentless, terrifying truth. Her life and their unborn child's life rested in the hands of fate, and he had never felt more helpless in his life. As the tension escalated, Kevin's grip on her hand tightened instinctively, his knuckles whitening. His mind raced with strategies he didn't have time to implement, with threats he couldn't act on fast enough, with regret he couldn't erase. The hospital's bright lights, the sterile smell, the constant beeping, they all faded into a blur. All that mattered was her. All that mattered was the tiny life she carried and the love he had refused to abandon. Until now. The doctor stepped even closer, lowering his voice so only Kevin could hear. "We need absolute calm and immediate cooperation, Mr. Smith. She may not survive the stress otherwise. The baby is also critical. We're trying everything, but you must be prepared for anything." Kevin's eyes burned with a mixture of fear, rage, and desperate determination. He swallowed hard, nodding silently, refusing to let panic show on his face. Not here, not now. He would not lose them, not again, not ever. The storm inside him roared louder than any hurricane outside, a storm built from love, fury, and unshakable devotion. Kevin's gaze fell on Aleena, so fragile, so pale, so close to the edge of life, and he realized one terrifying truth. He was too late in so many ways, and the clock was ticking faster than his heart could keep up. The moment Aleena's eyelids fluttered open, the world seemed to narrow down to the space between them. Kevin's bloodshot eyes, etched with exhaustion and raw, desperate fear, stared down at her. She froze, chest trembling, as disbelief and a fragile, cautious hope warred inside her. Every heartbeat felt deafening. She could see the storm etched across his features, the fury that had always defined him, tempered now by fear, guilt, and love, so overwhelming it made her chest ache. Why are you here?" she whispered, voice barely audible, thick with pain, confusion, and a deep, haunting sense of betrayal that lingered from the months he had been absent. Kevin's gaze softened, and his voice cracked as he spoke, raw and guttural with emotion. "Because you're still my life, Aleena. No one else ever was." His words hung in the sterile air, fragile yet heavy, like a bridge over months of distance and heartbreak. Tears welled up in her eyes, refusing to fall as she looked away to hide the storm of emotion that raged inside her. Her hand rose weakly, instinctively brushing over her stomach where the life they had shared silently for months had grown without his knowledge. A pang of guilt twisted through Kevin's chest as he realized how she had carried their child alone, believing he would not want them, believing he had moved on with his life while she endured the lonely ache of pregnancy, fear, and uncertainty. Every heartbeat of hers felt like an accusation, a painful reminder of all he had missed. "Aleena," he whispered, voice breaking, "keeping this from me didn't protect us. It broke us. Every day you suffered alone. It broke me, too. I'm so sorry." Her lips trembled as she fought to speak, voice trembling as though even the sound of it would shatter her entirely. I thought you had moved on, that you had forgotten, that you didn't want us." Her confession pierced Kevin like a blade, the fragile threads of her voice exposing the cracks in both their hearts. He wanted to reach across the bed, to take her hand, to hold her tightly and never let go, but fear and guilt tangled with a sense of desperation, making him hesitate. He wanted to tell her everything, to confess that not a day had gone by that he hadn't thought of her, hadn't wondered if she was alive, if she was safe, if their child was safe. Every word he had left unsaid for months now hovered between them, heavy and dangerous. Kevin swallowed hard, his throat tight, chest heaving as he stepped closer. "Aleena, I never stopped. I never stopped thinking of you. I never stopped loving you. You and our child. You are everything. I should have been here. I should have protected you, held you, shielded you from everything. I failed. I failed you both. But I am here now, and I swear I will never leave again." His words were barely audible through the raw, choking emotion, but they carried a weight that filled the room, drowning out the sterile beeps and faint footsteps of the hospital staff. Aleena's eyes glistened with tears, but she still hesitated. The fear of the world outside, the dangers of his mafia life, the memories of betrayal and absence still binding her heart. I didn't want you to know," she whispered finally, voice quivering. "I didn't want to pull you back into danger. I didn't want you to get hurt for something you didn't need to." Each word was a dagger of both pain and love, and Kevin's chest tightened painfully. Months of silence, months of isolation, months of carrying both fear and life within her alone. It had all led to this fragile, heart-wrenching confession. He knelt beside the bed, gripping her hands gently, eyes locked on hers. "Aleena, protecting me never mattered. Protecting you, protecting us, that mattered, and you suffered alone. That was my failure, not your strength. Your strength is what kept both of you alive." Her lips quivered, but the smallest flicker of relief, of recognition, broke through her terror. I thought you left because you hated me, because you hated what we were, because you didn't want me or him or them," she murmured, voice breaking, eyes falling to the monitors tracking her and their unborn child. Kevin's heart shattered at her words. Every second of absence, every tough decision, every night spent sleeping, alone with nothing but memories and regrets. They all coalesced into one sharp, piercing realization. She had been surviving without him, silently, painfully, while he had assumed his absence was necessary, and that assumption had cost them both. He pressed his forehead to hers, holding her hands as tightly as he dared, and whispered through ragged breaths, "I never hated you, Aleena. Never once. I left only to keep you safe from what I couldn't protect you from if I stayed. But leaving you alone, that was the cruelest part of all. I am so sorry. I will fix this. I will fix everything." Each word carried a tremor of desperation and urgency, as if the sheer force of his voice could summon fate itself to their side. Aleena's eyes searched his, tears spilling freely now as the weight of months of unspoken fears and love finally collided in the room. But before either of them could fully grasp the fragile, tenuous thread of reunion, the monitors blared suddenly, piercing, alarming, urgent. A violent, shrill beep cut through the room like a warning siren. Kevin jerked upright, panic snapping through him like a live wire. "Doctor!" he shouted, heart in his throat. Nurses rushed to the bed, moving with precision but speaking in urgent whispers too fast for him to comprehend. Aleena's eyes widened with fear, a weak gasp escaping her lips. Kevin's hands were on her shoulders in an instant, gripping her gently but firmly as he tried to ground her, to anchor both of them in the chaos. "Stay with me," he breathed fiercely. "You are not leaving. Not today. Not like this. Not ever." The monitors beeped faster, alarms shrieking in tandem, and Kevin's stomach dropped into a pit of fear he had never felt in his entire life. The woman he loved, the child he had unknowingly created, both teetered on the brink of disaster. He felt the years of absence, the mistakes, the unspoken regrets, all crashing down like boulders. Every breath he took was sharp and shallow. Every heartbeat seemed to echo in his skull like a drum of war. "Mr. Smith, step back!" one of the nurses shouted urgently, but Kevin barely heard her. He was locked onto Aleena, seeing the frailty, the exhaustion, the pain etched into every line of her face, every flicker of her eyelids. And then the doctor's voice rang out, low, tense, impossibly serious. "We're losing her! And the baby!" Kevin's knees buckled slightly, his chest tightening until it felt like it would shatter. Adrenaline surged, fear exploded, and a raw, unfiltered fury boiled beneath his skin. Not anger at the world, but a ferocious, protective rage at the thought of losing them both. "No," he whispered, voice breaking as tears ran unchecked down his face. "I won't let this happen. Not now. Not ever." As he reached desperately to hold her hand again, the alarms intensified, red lights flashed across the room, and Kevin realized that their lives, the fragile thread of survival, hung by a single terrifying heartbeat. 4. Kevin's world spun violently as he stood outside the heavy operating doors, his fists shaking so hard that the metal rail he gripped threatened to bend under the pressure. The sterile white lights above him flickered faintly, reflecting the storm raging inside him, the fire that refused to be contained. He could hear the muffled sounds of the monitors and the frantic whispers from the nurses through the thick doors, but they were distant, almost irrelevant compared to the whirlwind of fear, anger, and helplessness consuming him. His chest tightened with a weight he couldn't name, a crushing pressure born from love, guilt, and the terrifying reality that the woman he had sworn to protect and their child were fighting for their lives inside, alone, vulnerable, and in his absence. The sound of hurried footsteps behind him pulled him from the dizzying whirlwind of thoughts. His men arrived, faces pale and taut with panic, their breaths ragged from running through the hospital corridors. "Boss," one of them whispered, almost too quietly to hear over the chaos in Kevin's mind. This wasn't an accident. Aleena, she was drugged, a slow-acting sedative meant to weaken her over time. The words hit Kevin with a force that rivaled any bullet he had ever taken in his career. His blood turned to molten fury, every nerve in his body electrified with rage, so violent it left him trembling uncontrollably. The world narrowed, everything except the thought of vengeance and survival of the woman he loved and the child she carried. "Who touched her?" he demanded, voice low, deadly, controlled yet trembling with barely suppressed rage. Each syllable was a promise of destruction, a warning to anyone who had dared harm her. The silence that followed was brief before his lieutenant spoke, his eyes wide with fear. "We traced it, boss. The Moretti Syndicate. The same family that's sworn revenge on you for years. They orchestrated this. Kevin's mind flashed instantly to every old enemy, every violent betrayal, every threat he had neutralized. Yet here was proof that the past had returned with sharpened claws. Every cell in his body ignited with a raw, visceral rage. It wasn't just the assault on Aleena, it was a direct strike at him, a reminder that the darkness he'd thought he left behind had been waiting, patient and poisonous, all along. His breath hitched, chest heaving as the anger coiled tightly in his stomach like a living thing, demanding release. He imagined the Moretti Syndicate's smug faces, the way they would have laughed, confident that their plot would break him, that it would finally hurt him where it mattered most. But they had underestimated him. They had underestimated the depth of his love, the ferocity of his rage, and the lengths he would go to protect what was his. While Aleena fought for her life inside, he realized the cruel truth. She had been suffering alone, not because of her own choices, not because of fate, but because of enemies he had made, battles he had fought, and a world he had built around himself that now threatened to destroy the most precious part of it. The hospital seemed to close in on him, the sterile walls suddenly suffocating, and every sound, footsteps, beeping monitors, the distant clatter of trolleys, became amplified in his ears. His fists clenched harder, nails digging into his palms as if holding himself together, physically could stabilize the whirlwind inside. Every plan, every negotiation, every empire he had built now seemed insignificant compared to the fragile lives behind those operating doors. He felt the world tilt violently, the floor beneath him seeming too solid to hold the intensity of fear, the suffocating need to act, to control, to save them. The doctor appeared suddenly, his face pale, eyes wide with a mixture of exhaustion and fear. "Her condition is dropping again," he warned, voice tight with tension. "Without the father present, the stress is overwhelming her system. She can't handle this alone." Kevin's entire body went rigid. The realization hit him with the force of a tidal wave. All the months of absence, the guilt, the silence, they had compounded, creating a fragile, terrifying situation that no medicine or intervention alone could fix. He couldn't wait. He couldn't negotiate. He couldn't allow protocol to dictate his actions. This was not the time for patience. This was the time for fury, for love, for instinct. Without hesitation, without regard for procedure or authority, Kevin pushed past the doctor, ignoring the protests and shocked stares from the staff. Every muscle in his body coiled like a spring, ready to unleash decades of pent-up violence on anyone threatening the woman he loved. He ran down the corridor, his shoes echoing against the tile, heart hammering in his chest as if it wanted to escape and fly to her side faster than his legs could carry him. The antiseptic smell of the hospital, the beeping of monitors, the whispered commands of nurses, all of it blurred into a single, urgent background to the desperate focus in his mind. Aleena needed him. Their child needed him, and he would not fail them. As he approached the ICU room, he saw her, so fragile, so pale, lying beneath the harsh lights, surrounded by frantic nurses, every flicker of her chest monitored as though it were the most delicate instrument on earth. Kevin's heart contracted violently, pain slicing through him as he saw the tiny, trembling movements, the uneven breaths, the vulnerability that he could not tolerate. His hand shot forward instinctively, gripping her arm, feeling the faint warmth beneath his touch. "Aleena, I'm here. I'm right here," he whispered, voice ragged, tears threatening to fall, emotions raw and unfiltered. A weak, barely audible sound escaped her lips, the tiniest fragment of voice that carried everything she could muster. "Kevin, don't let them take my baby." Her words broke him in a way nothing else ever could. Rage, fear, love, and desperation collided inside him, making his blood feel like fire in his veins. Every instinct screamed to tear the world apart if necessary, to annihilate the Moretti syndicate, to destroy anything that dared touch her, to rip life itself from the edge if it threatened her. The room narrowed, the monitors blared, the alarms screamed. But all Kevin could hear was her voice, fragile and pleading, and he felt the weight of responsibility and love settle over him like armor he could never remove. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the nurses' rapid movements, the beeping machines, the fragile line of life that connected mother and child. Each second stretched endlessly, each heartbeat a reminder of the stakes, of everything he had fought to protect, yet failed to shield her from until now. His hands trembled as he gripped her fingers, desperate to transfer strength, to anchor her to life and will, to promise in ways words could never express that he was there and would never leave. Kevin's gaze fell on the doorway, and he realized with bone-deep certainty that every second mattered. Every breath was fragile, and any misstep could cost him the woman he loved and the child he had unknowingly created. His eyes burned with fury and desperation, and in that moment he silently vowed that anyone, anything would pay if they tried to take them from him. Kevin's hands gripped Aleena's trembling ones as though letting go even for a second could shatter the fragile thread that kept her tethered to life. The oxygen mask covered her face, her body quivering uncontrollably under the weight of pain and fear, but he pressed his forehead gently to hers, willing her to feel his presence, his devotion, his fierce determination to never leave her side again. "I'm here. I'm not leaving again," he whispered, voice rough, broken, filled with a mix of desperation and love that had built up over months of absence, over nights spent haunted by memories of her alone. The words hung between them like a lifeline, fragile yet potent, and her eyelids fluttered as if the sound of him being there had given her the strength to breathe. Tears streamed down Aleena's pale cheeks, slipping through the corners of the oxygen mask, pooling against her collarbones. Her voice, weak and quivering, broke the quiet of the sterile ICU, trembling under the weight of all she had endured. I tried to stay strong, but every night I broke without you," she confessed, a whisper of vulnerability that made Kevin's chest tighten so violently it felt as though it would explode. The sound of her words, the depth of the pain they carried, crushed him in ways no gunfire or betrayal ever had. He leaned closer, pressing his lips to her temple for the briefest of moments, a silent apology, a vow, a prayer, all in one. "You promised forever, Kevin," she murmured, the words slipping out as if they had been trapped in her throat for months, accumulating until they could be held in silence no longer. The weight of those words struck him harder than any bullet he had ever faced. Guilt gnawed at him, like a relentless predator, consuming every rational thought, every shred of self-control. He had left to protect her, believing his absence would shield her from the dangerous world he inhabited. But now, standing beside her, witnessing her suffering firsthand, he realized the bitter, inescapable truth. He had failed her in the most profound way possible. "I left to protect you, not abandon you," he whispered, voice raw and trembling. "But I was wrong. You needed me, and I failed." Each word was a confession, a brutal acknowledgement of the mistakes that had cost them months of separation, months of silent suffering, months of a pregnancy endured alone. His gaze never left hers, burning with a combination of regret, love, and an unwavering promise to never let go again. He could feel the baby inside her, fragile, tiny, and perfect, and the reality that he had almost missed this miraculous life ignited a fire within him that was equal parts fury and devotion. Aleena clutched his hand with surprising strength, pressing it against her chest as if anchoring herself to him, her voice barely more than a fragile thread of sound. "I was so scared, raising our baby alone," she whispered, each word dripping with a mixture of fear, sorrow, and enduring love. The words struck Kevin like a thunderclap. Our baby. The truth hit him in a way nothing else ever had. This child was theirs, a living, breathing testament to their love, and it was the most beautiful, most precious thing he had ever known. His fingers tightened around hers, knuckles white, as the weight of responsibility, love, and regret collided violently in his chest. Before they could linger in the fragile, heart-wrenching moment, the doctor rushed into the room, his face pale and eyes filled with urgent tension. "Mr. Smith!" he called, voice sharp, slicing through the fragile cocoon Kevin had wrapped around them. Kevin looked up, his mind still reeling from Aleena's confession, from the warmth of her hand, from the love that was so violently raw and unspoken for months. "Her body is crashing again. She needs immediate intervention," the doctor continued, words hanging like a guillotine over their fragile reunion. Kevin felt the room tilt, his heart leaping violently into his throat. The world narrowed, his chest tightened, his throat constricted, and every muscle in his body tensed as the weight of the situation descended upon him. There was no time for fear, no room for hesitation. His love, his guilt, his devotion, all converged into one violent, desperate need to save her, to save their child. Kevin's mind raced, recalling every moment he had ever spent with Aleena. Every night he had haunted himself with regrets. Every day he had wished he could go back and undo the absence that had brought them to this moment. And now the decision lay entirely on him. The doctor's next words pierced through the fog of panic and emotion. "If you want to save them, you need to sign a high-risk consent right now." Kevin's hand shook as it hovered above the clipboard, the weight of his signature heavier than any weapon he had ever held. One stroke of ink could decide life or death. One decision could preserve or destroy everything he had fought for, everything he had lost, everything he had finally regained. He looked at Aleena, the fear, exhaustion, and enduring love etched into her pale features, and the fire inside him ignited like molten lava. This child, this woman, this fragile, perfect life. It would be defended with every ounce of strength, rage, and love he had. Tears blurred his vision as he bent closer to her, voice raw but resolute. "I promise. I'll never leave again. I'll never let go. Whatever it takes, we survive this. Both of you." The nurse handed him the pen, his hands trembling so violently he thought he might drop it. The pressure was unbearable, but he forced himself to focus, to center on the two lives that depended entirely on him. Each heartbeat, each flicker of the monitor, each shallow breath Aleena took became his entire world, his sole purpose, his mission beyond every empire, beyond every vendetta, beyond every dangerous choice he had ever made. As Kevin's hand finally pressed the pen to paper, sealing the high-risk consent, a mixture of fear, hope, and raw, uncontainable love surged through him. Aleena's eyelids fluttered as she sensed his touch, as though the mere act of him being present, of him choosing to fight for them, was enough to keep her tethered to life for just a few more seconds, just a few more minutes, just a few more heartbeats. Kevin pressed his forehead against hers once more, whispering desperate promises of survival, of protection, of eternal love. "You stay with me," he murmured. "You and our child, you both stay with me." The monitors beeped faster, alarms shrieked, and the entire room seemed suspended in a tense, breathless moment, the future uncertain, and Kevin realized with a chilling certainty that every heartbeat, every second, and every choice from this moment forward would determine whether the woman he loved and their child survived or were lost forever. Kevin's hand trembled as the pen hovered over the high-risk consent form, the weight of his signature heavier than any weapon he had ever held in his life. Every line of ink would seal the fate of Aleena, the child growing within her, and the life he had vowed to protect at all costs. He could feel the pulse of fear and desperation thundering in his chest, each beat a violent drum echoing the storm of emotion that had consumed him for months. He remembered the nights he had lain awake, haunted by thoughts of her alone, haunted by the image of her trembling, terrified, and now the reality before him demanded action, demanded courage, demanded sacrifice. With a breath so jagged it shook his entire body, he pressed the pen to the paper, sealing the promise that nothing, not even fate itself, could undo. As soon as the signature was complete, the nurses moved with precise urgency, wheeling Aleena toward the waiting surgery room. Kevin's hands gripped hers instinctively, holding her fragile fingers as if he could transfer all his strength, all his will to live into her veins. She lifted her head weakly, eyes flickering with fear and trust, and her lips parted, whispering words that shattered him from the inside out. "If something happens to me, promise you'll love the baby." The air itself seemed to constrict, as if the hospital, the world, even time itself had stopped in recognition of the gravity of her words. Kevin's chest tightened violently, a searing pain ripping through him, but he pressed his forehead to hers, voice raw, broken, and urgent. "Nothing will happen to you. Do you hear me?" he whispered fiercely. "You come back to me, both of you. You will survive this, Aleena, I swear it." Her tears slid sideways, tracing paths down her pale cheeks, and Kevin felt his heart break into 1,000 jagged pieces, each shard cutting him deeper than the last. He couldn't bear to look away, couldn't bear to let go, and yet he had no choice as the doors to surgery slid closed, leaving him standing outside in a sterile hallway filled with blinding lights and the harsh scent of antiseptic. Minutes stretched like hours. The pounding of his heart, the rapid rhythm of fear and hope, became deafening. Every step of the nurses, every murmur of the doctors, every click of their instruments echoed like a death knell in his ears. His men stood behind him silently, the unspoken knowledge hanging heavy in the air. This was no ordinary waiting game, no casual negotiation, no calculated risk. This was a broken man praying for the lives of the two beings he loved more than anything, more than power, more than money, more than his own survival. The hallway was silent, almost too quiet. Kevin's eyes darted repeatedly to the closed doors as if he could see through them, could monitor each flicker of the monitors, each shallow breath, each flicker of pain, each tear escaping Aleena's eyes. But all he could do was wait, helpless, tortured by the inability to act, unable to protect them while they hung in the balance between life and death. He thought of all the times he had left her, all the nights he had abandoned his own heart to protect a world she never asked for. And now, every second he spent outside those doors felt like punishment, a stark reminder that love demanded sacrifice beyond anything he had ever known. The beeping of the monitors inside the surgery room echoed faintly through the walls, but it was distant, muted, yet each pulse carried a silent plea he could feel in his bones. Kevin's fists clenched at his sides, nails biting into his palms, his jaw tight as he fought to hold back the tidal wave of fear that threatened to drown him. He could feel his body shaking, not from cold, but from the intensity of emotion that had been building for months, erupting now into raw desperation. He could almost hear Aleena's whispered pleas in his mind, the way her fragile voice had trembled as she asked him to love their child. And he repeated the words under his breath like a prayer, a mantra, a vow to the universe that he would do whatever it took. Time slowed, seconds stretching impossibly long, each one a sharp blade to his chest. Kevin's eyes flicked repeatedly down the hall, to his men, to the closed doors, to the sterile lights above. He could feel the pounding of his own blood in his ears, the the rapid-fire rhythm of anxiety and hope merging into a single, unbearable tension. Each beat of the clock on the wall was a countdown he could not ignore, a relentless reminder that the lives of the two most precious beings in his world rested on forces beyond his control. Yet he refused to move, refused to falter, refused to allow despair to take him even for a fraction of a second. Suddenly, alarms blared from within the surgery room, piercing, urgent, deafening. Nurses sprinted past the doors, shouts and commands bouncing off the walls, and Kevin felt his stomach drop into a pit of fear he had never known. He pounded on the doors with raw desperation, but the staff waved him back with careful hands, their faces etched with tension. He could only watch, helpless, as life and death danced behind the thick glass, and every second felt like eternity. His chest heaved violently, mind racing through every possible scenario, every plan he had ever made, every threat he could eliminate once the surgery was over. The world outside the doors seemed irrelevant. The empire he had built, the enemies he had destroyed, the wealth and power he had accumulated, all of it was meaningless against the stark reality that the woman he loved and their child could be taken from him in an instant. Kevin pressed his hands to his face, inhaling sharply, forcing himself to focus, to channel every ounce of control, every drop of fury, every fragment of love into the moment. He whispered promises aloud, words thick with emotion, pledges to protect, vows to fight, and prayers for the life teetering inside. And then, just as minutes stretched into unbearable tension, the surgery doors slammed open with violent urgency. Nurses rushed out, pushing past Kevin's men, voices raised with alarm and authority. Kevin's heart leapt into his throat. A surgeon, face taut with determination and fear, pointed directly at him. "We need the father inside, now!" Kevin's entire body went rigid, a mixture of adrenaline, terror, and resolve, igniting him from within. Every fiber of his being screamed to sprint forward, to hold Aleena, to protect the child, to not let the world touch them until he could guarantee their safety. His hands shook, his breath came ragged, and yet a surge of unshakable determination coursed through him. Nothing would stop him. Not now. Not ever. Kevin's eyes darted to the surgical room where the doors loomed like a gateway between life and death, and he realized with a brutal, bone-deep certainty that every heartbeat, every second, every choice he made in the next moments would determine whether he gained them forever or lost them irreversibly. Kevin bolted into the operating theater, his breath shallow, ragged, each inhalation punctuated by a surge of raw, desperate fear that clawed at his chest. Every second that had passed while Aleena lay under the threat of life and death had been a slow, grinding torment, each heartbeat a hammer of guilt and terror. His mind replayed months of absence, every night she had endured alone, every whispered prayer she had made for him, and the tiny, fragile life they had created together. The sterile white lights above him were harsh, almost unbearable, but he barely noticed. All he saw was her, pale, fragile, yet breathing, every rise and fall of her chest a miracle he had feared he would never witness. A rush of tears blurred his vision, but he barely cared. He fell to his knees beside the gurney, hands trembling violently as they brushed against Aleena's, feeling the warmth that signaled life, that promised survival. His voice cracked under the weight of emotion. "You're alive, both of you. Thank God," he whispered, each word trembling, raw, suffused with relief, love, and a gratitude so deep it seemed to shatter every wall he had built around himself. He could hardly comprehend that they were here, that the nightmare of the past hours, the terror, the pain, the absence, had finally ended in the most beautiful, impossible way. The baby stirred weakly against her mother's chest, tiny fingers curling around the fabric of her blanket. Kevin's eyes welled with tears, streaming freely now, uncontrolled. He reached out hesitantly, touching the newborn's fragile fingers as if contact could anchor her to him, could assure her that she was safe, that he was here and would never leave. The weight of the past months, the mistakes, the absence, the nearly unbearable guilt crashed into him all at once. This small, crying, perfect life was a part of him, a piece of his soul, and he had almost missed it. Aleena's eyelids fluttered open, slow and tired, yet her gaze found him immediately, softening even as exhaustion etched every line of her delicate face. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, fragile, yet filled with love. "She waited for you," she whispered, her voice weak but certain, "just like I did." Her words struck Kevin so deeply that the world seemed to collapse around him and reform into something new, something clearer, something filled with hope and redemption. He pressed his forehead to hers, careful not to disturb her, letting his lips brush her skin in a gentle, reverent kiss. "Aleena, I'm done with that life. My world begins with you and ends with her," he murmured, the promise heavier than any vow he had ever made, weighted with the knowledge of what he had lost and what he would never risk losing again. The doctors and nurses moved around them, still efficient, still urgent, yet Kevin's world had narrowed to this moment, to her, to their child. Aleena, with all her exhaustion, reached for him weakly, placing the newborn carefully into his arms. Kevin held her as though she were the most precious, fragile thing on earth, which she was. His lips trembled, voice cracking under the tidal wave of emotion that surged through him. "Welcome home, little one," he whispered to their daughter, rocking her gently, feeling the tiny heartbeat against his chest. "I left once, but I will never leave again. You too are my forever." The baby's faint cries mingled with the soft sobs escaping Aleena's lips, and Kevin felt an overwhelming tide of love crash over him. He leaned back slightly, cradling the tiny life, looking from Aleena to their daughter, realizing that everything he had built, everything he had fought for, paled in comparison to this fragile, perfect bond that no power, no fear, no enemy could ever sever. His chest heaved with gratitude, relief, and an intensity of emotion that rendered him breathless. Aleena's hand reached up to brush his cheek, fingers weak but steady, and he pressed his forehead to hers again, closing his eyes for a moment, silently thanking the universe for their survival. Her lips whispered, I knew you'd come back. I knew you'd fight for us." Kevin's heart tightened, every beat echoing with promise and love. "I'll never leave again. Ever," he vowed, voice trembling with conviction. He held them both, his heart, his soul, his love, all wrapped in his arms, and felt a peace he had never known, a completeness that erased years of regret, absence, and pain. He stood carefully, supporting Aleena and their child, feeling the fragile warmth of life in his hands, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to truly breathe. The world outside, the dangers, the enemies, the darkness, seemed distant and meaningless. Nothing mattered except this room, this moment, this family finally together. Kevin's eyes met Aleena's, and in that gaze, unspoken words passed between them. Words of forgiveness, understanding, and a love stronger than any obstacle they had ever faced. Minutes passed, though they felt like seconds, the adrenaline fading slowly as the reality of survival and reunion settled over them. Kevin sat beside Aleena's bed, holding both her hand and their daughter, rocking the tiny life gently. He whispered again, softer this time. "I left once, but I'll never leave again. You are my life, my world, my everything." The baby yawned softly, a tiny miracle of life and love, and Kevin pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, feeling the warmth, the heartbeat, and the promise of a future he had nearly been denied. Aleena's tired smile deepened, and she rested her head against his shoulder. "We're together now. Finally," she whispered. Kevin's voice was almost a growl, a protective, tender, fierce vow. "Yes, finally. And I swear, nothing will ever take you from me again." He looked down at their daughter, tracing her tiny features with his finger, memorizing every detail as though imprinting this moment in his soul forever. He could feel her tiny heartbeat against his chest, steady now, a rhythm of life and hope, and he vowed silently that it would never falter as long as he was breathing. The hospital room, once a place of fear and desperation, now shimmered with fragile warmth and the quiet, unshakable bond of family reunited. Kevin leaned back, holding Aleena against his chest, rocking both mother and child gently. He whispered one last time, voice trembling but fierce with love, "You two, you are my forever. Nothing, no one, will ever come between us again." And for the first time in years, Kevin Smith allowed himself to feel completely, unreservedly, and utterly whole. Outside the hospital, the world continued, dangerous and unpredictable. But inside that room, love had conquered fear, devotion had silenced despair, and a family had finally been made whole. A love stronger than any enemy, any empire, or any fate. And that's the end of today's story here on Heartwoven Tales. I hope you felt every moment as deeply as I did telling it. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already, so you never miss a story that will touch your heart. Comment below and tell me, what part of this story stayed with you the most? Until next time, I'm Selena, signing off with love and stories that live in every heart.